به جمهوری اسلامی نه، به جمهوری اسلامی نه، به جمهوری اسلامی نه، به جمهوری اسلامی نه. ما صدای آزادی با هم برای آبادی ایران می جنگیم.
We will begin shortly. We are waiting for our guests to join us, so we will begin shortly.
All right. Hello and welcome everyone to our fourth space session. We are very happy to have you with us here tonight. The aim of this space series is raising awareness on the Islamic regime's propaganda and the issues surrounding it. Our topics for tonight are anti-Semitism in the Islamic Republic and the JCPOA. Tonight's space session will have two sections. In the first part, we'll be discussing the topic with our guests. And in the second part, we're going to have a Q&A with our audience. I would also like to remind you about the technical issues that may arise. It may be that you don't have the audio or you can't use the space functions properly. In that case, please try to close and reopen your app, and hopefully that will solve the issue. And in case any problem happens on my side as the host, I will immediately create another session and we will all share the link so you can follow that link and join us again. All right, tonight with me, we have three moderators, Sarah, Mamadou, and Sirwan. And now I would like to pass the mic to them for them to introduce themselves. Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you, Ardashir. Hello, everyone. Happy to have you here. My name is Sarah. I am an Iranian citizen who seeks freedom. And I strongly say no to the Islamic Republic in Iran. I want regime change for my country. Due to the heavy oppression and censorship of true Iranian voices, we get together here to speak directly to the free world about our thoughts and demands. I would like to pass the microphone to Mamadou. Please, Mamadou.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Mamadou Babai, originally from Iran, who has been forced to live in exile in the Netherlands. Professionally, I'm a game developer, but after receiving a sentence of 30 lashes and 8 months of prison for practicing my natural and legal rights and participating in a few peaceful protests against the Islamic regime in Iran, I've got involved in Iran's politics. And that's why, as a living witness, I am here today in order to expose the state propaganda of the Islamic regime and to testify on the falseness of the narratives of Iran created by the regime's apologists throughout the decades. Thank you. I would like to pass the microphone to Mr. Mansouri.
Thank you very much. This is Sirwan Mansouri. We are very happy to have you today with us in this discussion and meeting. I'm a journalist and refugee rights activist living in exile. I had to leave the country forcibly due to political and journalism issues. I've published several articles on the Middle East and also have many talks on that topic. I hope we have a very good discussion tonight with you and fruitful. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Mansouri. In this event, we will focus on the anti-Semitism, which is the identity of the Islamic regime in Iran. And we want to say no to the nuclear deal and any appeasement with the regime. So I would like Ardashir that please send a microphone to our guests that we can officially begin the session. Thank you.
I have already sent the invitation, so if you could please accept it, or if you haven't received it, maybe try to close and reopen your app.
Great. So I would like to begin with Mr. Melamed. I'm happy to have you here, Mr. Melamed. So we will begin. I would like to make a statement first. The Ayatollahs Tyranny's regime file is not only a nuclear file, but also a human rights file. The question here is, why do you think the Biden administration is reducing the number of murderer Iranian protesters in November 2019 from over 1,500 to 304? Is it an insult to us? What is the intention behind this? Before you begin, could you please first introduce yourself very briefly to our audiences and then answer the question? Thank you.
On Israel again. So this can be actually a kind of give the regime some kind of leverage to negotiate in Vienna during the nuclear negotiations that's going on with the Western leaders. So I think the Iranian regime actually consciously did that, although they were also unhappy about the incidents going on in Iran, like the nuclear facility blast in Natanz and a couple other issues. But I think they also wanted to use the Hamas-Israel conflict as a point of actually pushing the West to give them more concessions.
Thank you very much, Reza, for your clarification point. Sarah, now mic is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mansouri. Mamadi, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question because it didn't came up actually at my comment and then ask a question. If it's okay with you, and I'm not interrupting.
No, sure,
okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I would say since the establishment of the Islamic regime in Iran, the regime has been trying to create this false narrative that anti-Semitism and a hostile attitude toward Jews is deeply rooted in the Iranian society. Despite the fact that Jews have been living in Iran for almost 3,000 years, and 25,000 Jews are still harbor the biggest Jewish community in the Middle East, of course, after the State of Israel. Thus, one could easily come to the erroneous conclusion, especially if they don't know they don't have any information about Iran, they don't know the Iranian community, that the majority of Iranians are anti-Semitic. Furthermore, in order to convey such a false message, they have been glorifying anti-Semitic terrorists. For example, one notable example of that I could think of is the Egyptian soldier Soleiman Khater, who opened fire on Israeli tourists in Egypt, killing 7 civilians, including children and also a police officer. So my question is, how could, especially with their propaganda, like the Quds Day, they set Israel flag on fire. How could Iranians change this narrative, especially with the, with the amount of propaganda, with the amount of effort, regime and their apologies they put in? How could Iranian counter this propaganda effectively? If anyone, any of the guests could answer that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
So I guess there is nobody who wants to answer this question, so I probably can discuss it. Thank you very much, Mamadi-Jan, for your very sharp point. This is actually what the regime has been doing in regards to a lot of other things. It's not just anti-Semitism. It's also, for example, the regime or the regime lobbyists here in the West constantly want to say Iran and the Iranian regime are the same. We as dissidents have been fighting tooth and nail to distinguish between the two. There is Iran and there is the Iranian regime, and they are very different. Because when, this has a strategic goal actually behind it. Because if the regime has the whole country behind it, 80 million people, they can easily push their agenda here in the West and say, look, this is not what we say as just the government. It's the people of Iran. It's the nation that wants it. For example, they say the nation wants to build nuclear capability. or the nation wants Iran to be present in Lebanon or Syria. Same thing with anti-Semitism. If they can posit it, they can pose as, the Iranian people, an 80 million nation, is against Israel or is anti-Semitic, then they think they will have more leverage on international stage. So that's what they have been doing for the past 40-something years. And their lobbies in the West, who are at the beck and call of the regime, they try to actually push that agenda. In the media or wherever they go, they just use Iran. Iran did this. Iran said that. No, that's the Iranian regime. Iran means the people of Iran. And the people of Iran are very different. They have a very different attitude towards the world and their lives than the regime itself. So I think this is a good point, Mamadou John, and about how we can actually make that distinction prominent. Same thing that we have been doing, but with more force and planning. Wherever we go, wherever we talk, wherever we write, we should distinguish between the two. The Iranian regime says that, the Iranian regime does that, but Iran or the people of Iran think like that. This is very important. And if you have noticed more recently in the past couple of years, the media, especially in Israel and also in some Arabic countries, have made the distinction. They use Iranian regime and Iran. That's different. That's good. Some of the Western media also do that, but we need to push for it because here the left's influence is more strong. So the media who are inclined towards the ideology of the left in the West, they still don't make that distinction. However, if we push constantly and if we raise consciousness constantly, they will have to do it in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parchizadeh, for a great answer. Thank you. I also would like to ask Mr. Adrian Kalamel to become a speaker if they are willing to. Ardeshir, could you send them an invitation to become a speaker?
I'm already up here, Mamadou.
He's on the stage, Mamadou.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was not able to see it. I was seeing him as listener.
Quite all right. It's difficult. I do think maybe I'm just living in a bubble here, but I do think that the American public realizes that there's a difference between Iran, the country, and the Islamic regime, the Islamic Republic, this tyranny. As far as the anti-Semitism, it is so difficult to combat when you're talking about generations here now, 42 years of propagating, blood libels, tropes, things that have been used all the way for upon centuries to victimize the Jewish population. You see TV specials, and it's not just in. And right now, I do see that in the Islamic Republic, at least from the outside looking in, with clubhouse spaces, that you do have a lot of people that are. I mean, we can look at the protests, and clearly the majority of the country is anti-regime. And you also, I see what you call declension, a number of people moving away from Shiism and from this non-secular movement. What I do see is in the surrounding areas, Lebanon, Syria, there's always two people that they blame. They either blame, let's say in Lebanon, a lot of times they're going to blame the Israelis. Okay, and they're going to blame Israel. In Syria, and this is from having several Syrian students in my classes at different times, it was always to blame either Assad or blame the state of Israel. Okay, and I had this student for 3 semesters, and she was young, 30, just tried to get her to read other stuff and just see the other side. And I could see that I could not unwind that level of indoctrination. And I said she was about 30 years old, in just that amount of time. So in the West, we've completely failed as far as combating anti-Semitism and
and understanding how it's being propagated in the region. And with the state, with the Islamic Republic, they have a tremendous amount of soft power. When you look at FARS news agency, IRIB, broadcasting in different languages, and then also the television stations such as El Manar, they're pushing the Tehran narrative as well. So it's very difficult. And how can you get that toothpaste back in the bottle? I don't know if you can. What we can do is we can educate the American public that, if you look back to, the Babylonian captivity, the Persian people were the saviors of and you had this huge Jewish population in Iran, and still do, but it's dwindling, and they're persecuted, and it's because of this tyranny. And these are one of the things everybody talks about JCPOA. No, we need to look at the human rights, the persecution against Jews, against Baha'i, against Zoroastrianism, those individuals. And I think if we can kind of separate those two areas and look at those human rights violations, the anti-Semitism that we see playing out on the streets of the United States is absolutely disgusting, saw it coming. We can hopefully, make some type of change. I've talked long enough. I hope that was helpful for some people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalamel. I would like to go back to Mr. Parchizadeh. As I asked this question previously, I'm going to repeat it again. Why do you think that the Biden administration reduced the number of murdered Iranian protesters in November 2019 from over 1,500 to just 304? What is the intention behind that? Because I'm as an Iranian, I take it as a big insult.
Thank you very much, sir, for asking that very important question. And sorry, I forgot to answer you before. But I guess there are a lot of questions and important subjects, and sometimes I just forget. So that's a good point. And unfortunately, this is a trend that we also saw during the Obama administration over a decade ago. Just because Mr. Obama and his administration wanted to come to the negotiating table with the regime and come to a deal with them, they were willing to close their eyes on the atrocities of the regime against the people of Iran and the people of the Middle East. Now is the same thing. Because in the West, we know that everything is based on human rights and democracy and the rule of law, but we know that no such thing exists in Iran. However, in order to be able to come to the table and talk to the regime in Iran and possibly conclude a deal with them, the West needs to depict the regime in Iran as an entity that has at least some kind of reason, or at least respects the human rights of the people to some degree. So if they say, for example, this regime with which we are going to conclude a deal, just a year ago or 2 years ago, killed a couple of thousands of its people just because they wanted reforms or they wanted democracy, then all the world and the people in the West and, the rest of the world will say, this is a regime that easily kills its own people because they want freedom. Then how come you want to come to a deal with this? So in order to be able to actually sit down with the regime, they need to actually show that the regime's hands are less bloody than the people say, or than the human rights organizations around the world say. That is, I believe, the reason that recently the Biden administration has tried to reduce the number of the killed 2 years ago, which is an unfortunate event. It goes actually against the profession of the administration itself, that they have come to emphasize human rights and democracy in American foreign policy, because that's what they are accusing the previous President Trump, of violating. They say he was not for human rights and democracy. in foreign policy. Now, I'm not arguing about that. That's a different point. But what I'm saying is that this administration itself has been emphasizing that they have come to rectify the wrongs of the past and to emphasize human rights and democracy in American foreign policy. But is that so? While you're reducing the number of the killed by the Iranian regime just to facilitate the conclusion of a deal with the criminal regime in Iran? Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pachizadeh, for your explanation. Let us welcome our another guest, Maysam Nouri. Mr. Maysam, please introduce yourself briefly, and then I ask you a question.
Sure. My name is Maysam Nouri, background in sociology, psychology, and also engineering. This is very brief introduction. So, but I think honestly, the meeting is very unilateral, and but the time is limited. I don't want to make it too challengeable. But let's start with the last question that Sarah asked. Can you hear me?
Okay, sorry for interrupting you. Let me to ask you question. To ask the question, as you know, the time is limited.
Sure. I have a quick question on the last sentence. So I would like to know how many killed people Trump administration announced about the reduced number that I agree with. I'm curious to know how many killed person, because that bloody November happened in that time, right? Trump administration. How many people? Does any guest know that number? I don't remember.
The number was at 1,500. They had pegged at 1,500. Then the Biden administration pushed it down to, what was it, 300 something?
No. Does Trump administration officially mention that 1,500?
Yes, they had mentioned the 1,500. I mean, that's been a major talking point. That's a number that gets thrown out all through the West. But then I believe that number is actually higher. And then we got to look at the number of people who have been thrown in prison because of that.
Yeah, I do agree with that. My point was, I read the Reuters report the first time, that number 1,500, but I do not remember Trump administration officially said that number. That's what I was curious to know. Many knowledgeable
please
people.
Let me to continue the topic, and I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, now go ahead with your
Okay. My question is that, as you know, now Biden's administration and Iran are on the table to rejoin JCPOA. As Dr. Pachizadeh said, the human rights is a very important issue that they should talk about. But as we know, Democrats, and especially Biden, I think has no declaration to talk about human rights, which is very important for us. What do you think about this matter, and how do you think should Biden's administration include the human rights matter into the negotiation?
Do you want me to handle this one? I don't think
now, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that is a fact, and not only for Biden administration. Same thing, in my opinion, with Trump administration. Maybe for Iran was a special case because of due to other concern that Trump administration had, like security of Israel and U.S. allies in the region. We fortunately had. I would say, accidentally aligned with Trump administration, especially regarding Iran. But in general, there is a big discussion here in the U.S. that I also agree with, that, having a balance between American values like human rights, freedom, democracy, liberty, and American profit or benefit. I mean, having a balance point, we are not idealists. I don't think any of us believe that U.S. would, fight for our freedom or democracy. But of course, as the only democratic superpower, we believe that U.S. should take human rights in consideration. Therefore, your question, in my opinion, apply to all governments of the administration of the U.S., the previous one and the current one. But since the current one, once President Trump withdrew from JCPOA, and now Biden shows tendency to come back to the negotiation, it would be very crucial that we as Iranian people.
Mason, we haven't your voice.
Maybe in the meanwhile, Mr. Adrian could make his comment, because also I guess he wants.
Negotiation with Iran.
Yeah, it's the whole JCPOA, and even for 42 years, the United States has not had a consistent policy with Iran. And then all of a sudden, I mean, we were with Tehran, with the Islamic Republic. And then I would say it was a rather bipartisan issue. Everybody saw them as a problem, the Islamic Republic, but then also said they didn't have a policy. For the first time, you do have a consistent policy. So I see that as being that split with Obama coming in and the JCPOA. All of a sudden, Iran, the Islamic Republic, becomes a partisan issue, and it's pretty much split it down party lines. So it's become a dogmatic belief, and they can talk human rights, and they talked about human rights all through the campaign. And I heard over and over in the Iranian diaspora in the United States saying, well, at least Joe Biden, he's going to be tough on him because he believes in human rights and talks about human rights. But their actions are not meeting up with their words. It just does not match up. If they would make preconditions saying, listen, yeah, you're going to have to release foreign hostages. You're going to have to, admit to the downing of the Ukraine PS-752. You're going to have to do these type of things. The other thing that I think that Trump, he said that people I think we can look at Iran policy, Islamic Republic, his policy towards the Islamic Republic, but you also have to look at what's going on in the entire region at the time. He saw, I think Pompeo especially saw this, the Shia Crescent, okay, being created, the Houthis in Yemen, you got, obviously Hezbollah, you have Syria, and he had a greater concern. He saw that all roads, the malign activities in the region, it wasn't so much about supporting it was about supporting your allies, but it was also about knowing who your enemies were and where those enemies were coming from. And it's coming right, it's Ali Khamenei, okay? It's Qasem Soleimani. Those are the enemies, and they were spreading that dissension. And the problem with the JCPOA is it releases all this money to put back into the proxies. So then it becomes a large regional issue, and it becomes more volatile at that point. So, as I say, the terror, it all comes back to this regime. And you see a significant uptick in 1979.
Thank you, Mr. Calamel. I'm going to go back to Mr. Melamed, and I'm going to ask him that, are you aware that the apologists of the regime in Iran created this delusion in the West, especially in United States, that there is reformists and hardliners in Iran, which obviously we Iranians don't believe that they are the same. Do you believe that they are really the same, or they are different?
They are one and the same. This is a political stunt, a publicity stunt to fool very naive Americans and Westerners that there's a quote-unquote reformist camp and quote-unquote hardliner camp. In reality, they're both sides of the same coin. When have you seen any of these quote-unquote reformists denouncing the regime's human rights abuses? When have you seen the quote-unquote reformists denouncing the Holocaust denial? When are you seeing these quote-unquote reformists denouncing the calls for Israel's destruction? It's a lot of rhetoric, and unfortunately, the Western media, the apologists, the supposed apologists the supposed journalists who are apologists of the regime, keep repeating these lies, and no one calls them out in the U.S. media, sadly. But there's no such thing as reformists and hardliners in Iran. Both sides of the same coin. and it's just a lie. It's a propaganda lie. It's a media ploy to make the regime look like there's a supposed moderate voice there, and they can, U.S. can negotiate with them. And unfortunately, many in the West, politically and in the media, have fallen for that propaganda.
Thank you, Mr. Melamed, for your remark. I'm going to ask you another question. Let's suppose the Iran talk is successful. Let's suppose that they brought up the human rights issue and they put it in the deal. Okay, so do you think that the regime in Iran is going to keep the promises after the deal?
I don't think so. This regime has had a notorious reputation for doing whatever they want. They have no regard for the U.S. They have no regard for Western deals. Let's not forget, for the past 42 years, they've been chanting death to America, death to Israel. They see the West as stupid, and this is just a ploy for them to get a political advantage, economic advantage against their main goal, which is hegemony in the region and just spreading their sick ideology.
Thank you, Mr. Melamed. I saw that Mr. Martin wanted to say something, but I don't see him in the room. Adisha, do you see him in the room? Do we have him?
No, I think he encountered a problem. Maybe he'll come back. I'll make him a speaker once he comes back. You can continue.
I want to ask Reza another question. Reza, you pointed out in your article that Iran had some cyber attacks on Israeli civilians. And also the Khamenei has used the word a final solution. As you know, this word reminds us about the removing Jews in Germany during the World War II. Reza, I want you to clarify for us through what methods Iran do cyber attacks, and also what should Biden administration to involve and include the human rights, a question that I asked Mr. Nouri too, to involve the human rights in the negotiation of rejoicing JCPOA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sirvanjan. Good point. It happened a couple of months ago, and the Iranian regime tried to tamper with some water processing plants in Israel. And, they tried to change the chemicals, and that would have poisoned a lot of Israeli citizens, which means that for the Iranian regime, it's not necessarily a political conflict with Israel, or even a military conflict with the government of Israel, because now they are trying openly to target the Israeli civilians and citizens. So this shows actually the depth of the regime anti-Semitism and their hypocrisy, that although they say we have a problem with the government of Israel and with Israel as a political entity, but they actually target Jews in Israel and everybody else without regard for any human lives. So I think this is something that should be really taken into account by the Western negotiators in Vienna, that if they are willing to make more concessions to the Iranian regime, the Iranian regime might eventually make well on its promise of driving the Jews into the sea and wiping off Israel and marching on Jerusalem. This is serious. This is not exaggeration, as they have recently showed with their barrage of Hamas missiles against Israel. So I think they should take it into consideration when they also want to deal with the regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza Jan. I see Mr. O. Sorry, no, he's not in stage.
Thank you, everyone. Actually, I'm in the back talking with Mrs. Kohanin. We are trying to
you. I saw Mr. Walton
bring her
as a speaker now.
Okay, so let's go to Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, I think you wanted to say something, but you went out of the room. Do you want to say make your remarks about the topic?
No, actually, I was trying to get you to send the room link to Ellie. I'm having trouble with the room today. Sound keeps cutting out. But yeah, she's trying to get in.
I will send it to you. I will send it to you in a direct message.
Please send it directly to Ellie.
I don't have access to her direct messages.
Actually, I sent already to Mrs. Ellie. Let's see if she can get in. Okay, meanwhile, I would like to say the Iranian demand here. Our demand from the United States is to side with the Iranian people, to support Iranian people against the Ayatollahs regime. Because when the US puts pressure on the regime, it emboldens and empowers the people to come out and voice their legitimate social and political concerns against the regime. That puts a limit and a check on what the regime can do and increase the cost of the regime's malice.
Definitely, people of Iran, they believe, who are not Iranian, they believe Iranians hated President Trump. But when you tell them no, he was very popular, or Mike Pompeo, he was very popular among Iranians and they liked them. They think, either you are lying or I don't know, that you are kidding with them. But that's what Iranians have been for a long time, in order to support them. Even, during the 2009 protests, they were chanting, Obama, ya ba ma, ya ba una. It was like, Mr. Obama, decide which side you are going to stand, with us or with the regime. And unfortunately, Obama chose to stand with the regime. And I believe, yes, Iranians have been wanting this for many, many years.
I want to come back to Maysam. Maysam, I have no question, but I want you to have any comment on the topic, because you wanted to speak and I interrupt you. Sorry. If you have any topic, any comment on the topic, please go ahead.
My question is, can you hear me? Because I felt
we hear you now. Yeah, you can continue.
No, previous time you interrupted me, or
my
voice?
No, we don't interrupt you. You kicked out from the room.
I have a general comment. In my opinion, if you would like, it's up to you. It's your room. You manage it. It's up to you. If you want to have, people come and talk on one side of the story, it's okay. It's your room. But if you want to have, different idea to come and, and people can think about different aspects of the issue, in that case, I do believe that you should give time in equal way to the people that think differently. That's my perception from this meeting, that people are all on same side and talks on same side of the story. And I have a lot of things in that side as well. But if you want to find the truth, you should. That's always in conversation. Bring two different.
We have a topic, and we want different people to speak about it. But we want the guests to speak from different angles. Okay. So
For example, different angle.
Yeah.
The statement. See, in previous time I said, for sure we as Iranian want that crazy regime go. Yeah, that's for sure. I'm with you with that one. And for sure, we want Western country as the civilization and democracy origin want to stay with us. That for sure. But misperception is that we think that Mike Pompeo give more weight to human rights than Biden or Obama. There are considerable fact, multiple cases that neglect that conflict with this statement. As I said, for previous administration in the U.S., there are other important measures, much more important than human rights, that put Trump administration and we, the people of Iran, on the same side, and we were fortunate. I'm happy for that, that we could have them with us. But human right was not that. That is, we should be naive to think in that way. Sorry for saying in this way, because President Trump was the only president of the U.S. that met that crazy dictator of North Korea. President Trump was the president that ignored intentionally, because of the American profit, that disaster, the massacre of Jamal Khashoggi. So we are talking about that administration. But I do agree that we will align with his administration with fighting against this crazy regime, Islamic Republic. My point is that we should see the reality of the political situation in the U.S. when we talk about that. We shouldn't approach the political situation like black and white, that one party stay with democracy or human right or the other one not. This is the general comment that I have about this matter. The second one is that I think is more practical, it's more pragmatic. I would like to ask your guest or whoever is familiar with financial or the international law, that how Iranian people request Western country to make sure even if they get to an agreement, how can Western country control the money, the money of the regime that would release to Iran to be used for the people, to minimize the chance. Of course, we cannot control for sure 100%, but how can Western country help people of Iran to minimize the chance that Iranian regime use those release money for the crazy thing that they do in the region? That would be one good question that I would like other guests to comment on that.
Okay, Mr. Mason, we get your comment. I want Dr. Reza Pachizadeh or Mr. Adrian to talk on the Mason's comment, if you want.
No, Mesa, I understand where you're coming from, and I don't want to get into the whataboutisms about human rights. The focus here is Iran. With the last part of your question, there's no way you can monitor this money. I don't know how it's possible. It's there. Every day, there was just one that was just a bank, an illicit scheme of funneling money through Bahrain that the Islamic Republic was using. You have bags and pallets of cash moving around with no accountability, and I don't think the West has the capacity or the ability to monitor that money. Just like I don't think they have the capacity and ability to monitor. I mean, they're self-monitoring their own nuclear sites right now, and the IAEA is about to be cut off from a lot of that. So I don't think there's a lot of ways you can trust or verify with money and different things.
The reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking, even if in previous administration, President Trump wanted to do a deal with the regime, but with his consideration, with his to meet his concern and his his administration concern. But at the end of the day, the plan was to get to a deal, right? That's why I was thinking maybe someone who is more familiar with that side of the President Trump approach. So I was thinking, okay, at the end of the road, therefore, it would be a deal, even with President Trump. How could imaginary deal keep the regime accountable, for that money? That's why I was asking, because
May I answer that question? I think Maysam's question is important. May I answer it?
Yeah. Please.
To the extent of my knowledge, thank you very much, Maysam, for the question, and Mr. Adrian for your attempt to reply. Actually, I can claim that I'm familiar with that issue myself, because since President Trump became president, I have been trying to tell him that, man, I understand that you think you need to be tougher on the regime, but at the end of the day, what you want is also a deal. You don't want to overthrow the regime. And that's what you have been telling the media. And you also made Mr. Pompeo, your Secretary of State, repeat that statement a couple of times, that at the end of the day, you want to deal with the regime. And that's what made the regime more confident, that if we hold on for a while, we're going to get rid of this Mr. Trump, and then we can get a better deal with the Democrats. And that's what happened eventually. So I agree with Maysam that even though Mr. Trump had a harsher rhetoric on the regime, but he eventually also wanted to deal with the regime. And that's why citizens who wanted to actually the regime overthrown and wanted democracy replacing this regime, we were sidelined by even the Trump administration. I'm not talking about Obama. I'm not talking about Biden. Mr. Trump, the tough guy, whom everybody, the people of Iran adored and thought that he is going to finally overthrow the regime. He sidelined dissidents like me because I was openly asking him to help Iranians overthrow the regime. So this is a good question. It's not necessarily a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. I think when it comes to replacing the regime with democracy in Iran, there is a bipartisan consensus in America that this is too much. We only want to lessen the, maybe to cut the rough edges of the regime, but keep it there eventually. We don't want it overthrown. So I think this is also something that we need to consider and keep addressing in our further discussions and probably in our articles that we write for different places. Thank you.
Thank you, Raza, for your clarification. I want to give back mic to Sarah to go to other guests. Sarah, mic is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mansouri. I see Mr. Gomgashte is among us as a speaker. I would like him to come on the floor, and you will have 2 minutes to wrap up your remarks or ask your questions, Mr. Gomgashte.
In the meanwhile, may I ask you, Ardishi, to send a request to Miss Shirmore? She's one of our guests, so she could.
I've already done that, but then she hasn't accepted it. I don't know if she received it or not. If not, please try to leave this space session and then rejoin us again, so I could invite you again. Thank you.
Gomgashte,
thank you very much. Hello. Albert Camus, when accepting Nobel Prize, said society gives meaning to a man as long as it's society, and those are the truth and freedom. I don't want to talk about Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden right now, because I think we're to talk about the Islamophobia or anti-Semitism of the Islamic Republic. But we should not forget that the Trump administration put a lot of sanctions on the Islamic Republic. A lot of them were for rights. He put IRGC, the #1 sponsor of terrorism in the region. He announced it as a terrorist organization. So these are very accomplishments that we don't see under Biden administration. Just take a look at the internet and you will see a lot of people, not people, actually thinking that the Islamic Republic is responsible for what happened in Gaza a few weeks ago. And that is all the money that comes to Iran in different ways, or illegal, it goes towards the goals of this regime. We should understand we're not talking to a democratic regime. We are talking to a regime that doesn't understand democracy. We want them to accept human rights in a deal. They do not understand human rights, and that's based on their mentality and their interpretation of the religion that they have. If you want to talk about human rights, and if we think Islamic Republic will accept these terms. I'm here to tell you they won't. What kind of Islamic Republic do you think accepts homosexual rights? What kind of Islamic Republic accepts the rights of minorities? What kind of Islamic Republic accepts the roles and the rights of the women? We've seen it for 42 years. This regime believes that the Islamic beliefs and interpretations that they have, they think they can use West as much as they want, and as long as they can get the money they want, and then they can use it for whatever reason they want. And we all know the reason. The reason is terror. The reason is unrest. The reason is oppression of the Iranian people. Just weeks ago, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas terrorist group, thanked Islamic Republic for everything that they've done in these days. Mr. Nuhala, the leader of Islamic Jihad in Palestine, also said the same thing. They Islamic Republic for all the weapons, for all the money that they've sent. These are I'm here to say, as a part of the Iranian, the nuclear deal will not stop the Islamic Republic from reaching nuclear or getting a nuclear bomb. As many European intelligence services said a few months ago, Islamic Republic has actively been looking for mass murder weapons and for nuclear weapons. 4,000 missiles were fired on civilians on Israel. Nobody talks about the damages that done to Israel. Everybody's talking about the damages to Gaza. If the President Biden comes and says, we are going to rebuild Gaza together and we are going to send money, but nobody actually talks about everything that happened after more than 4,000 missiles fired to a small country in the region. To sum it up, I don't have a lot of time. I think Islamic Republic should be forced to become a normal state in international relations. If you want to talk to them, if you think that they will understand democracy and freedom, they don't. If I have time later on, I will continue. Very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gomgashta. Thank you for your remarks. Mr. Nouri, I would like to ask you a question. Do you think, I asked this question previously from Mr. Melamed and I got my answer, but I would like to hear it from you. Do you think that if human rights include in the nuclear deal and everything goes well, they come up with a very perfect deal? Do you believe that the regime in Iran will keep the promises?
Yeah, you used the word promise in previous time to ask the other speaker. Yeah, my mindset does not work per word like promise, in political science. It's all about contract, it's all about verification and validation of the contract. So I don't think the word promise would carry or convey that meaning. So I think as long as they can put something measurable in the contract, something that you can evaluate, you can validate. In that case, yes, I can hope so that the international community can push on that one. But if we are talking about just something vague or general term like promise or improvement, something like that, that would not gonna work. That's why in previous question I asked about something that I don't have any expertise on it, which is financial, to see how we can make a systematic contract, something that is measurable. For example, for nuclear deal, I have a little different idea than your guess, and that's fine. So I think in nuclear deal, they did good for nuclear, facilities and those stuff by itself. The problem was the money that released. It was not good contract enough to control that one. So, but that's a problem. When you talk about technical stuff, you can do it with a lot of detail and measurable. But when you are talking about human rights and those stuff, making a deal which has a measurable item would be tough. Yeah, I don't trust to the regime, of course, but I think it is crucial to have something measurable in order to validate, in order to check it later, and some type of contract that has milestone, can be checked and verified at certain point. So this is the approach that should be taken. How? For financial stuff, I don't have expertise, but I would like to know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nouri, for your comments. Unfortunately, Ellie was not able to join us due to technical difficulties. So we would like to, because we are running out of time, we would like to begin the Q&A session. First, I would ask Mr. Mehdi Tehrani to ask his question. I see him connecting. Is he in the room?
Okay. Meanwhile, let's Mrs. Jurabchi is talking.
Hi everyone. Actually, I do have a question for Mr. Parshizadeh. He did mention that Trump should have gone harsher on Islamic Republic, and we did speak about this before. So I almost know what is his point, but I want to go with this, that now we have Biden, and this is it. What do you see the future, like a close future? Do you see Biden to go at least a bit tougher on Islamic Republic or not?
Thank you very much, Peter John, for your question. To correct you just a little bit, I didn't mean that Trump should have been necessarily tougher on the regime, because he was already tough enough. What I meant was that he should have gone all the way and helped the people of Iran topple the regime. That was the point, because as other speakers today aptly pointed out, as long as the regime exists in Iran, you cannot count on any stability in Iran and the region. There is no promise that the regime will keep. It will break all the promises to do what it wants. However, now to get back to your point about President Biden and his administration, I think he's a good-hearted man, and I think he's a positive person. However, his approach to the Middle East and to the issue of the Iranian regime is very misguided. And that's something that we have been saying for the past at least 10 years. I have been living in America for a decade now. I've always tried to tell the Democrats that I understand that you want to have a humanitarian approach to foreign policy and you're going for peace rather than conflict. However, there are times and there are regimes that don't understand that approach. With them, you need to be tough, and you need to go all the way and listen to the people. With President Biden, I think he's going to, as they say, that he's hell-bent, or his administration is hell-bent on getting that deal with the Iranian regime. However, as we dissidents warned the Obama administration over a decade ago, the deal is not going to work, because this is not a regime that will keep promises. It will break the promises, it'll enrich, and it'll probably get to a nuclear weapon or weapons as soon as possible, while also suppressing Iranian people and expanding in the Middle East. So I think eventually things will change. However, the administration needs to do what it needs to do, and we should do what we are supposed to do, just to put it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also see Miss Eli Kohanim. I would like to welcome her, and Ardashir, I would appreciate it if you could send her a request.
I'm trying to accept her request, but then it's not working.
Maybe
the
it's
problem
because
is that there is 10 speakers now. I'm going to move to audience so you can
Thank
add
you.
her.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it worked.
Perfect. Mrs. Ali Kohanin, very welcome to our session. It was a tough time that we can bring you here. So very welcome, and we would like to introduce you to our audience, and I'm going to give the time to you to introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll go to the questions.
Well, first of all, it's so wonderful for me to be joining you all, and thank you for inviting me. I know we've been trying to organize this for some time. So I'm Ellie Kohanim. I'm a former deputy envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism at the U.S. State Department. I served under the Trump administration. I am the State Department's first Iranian-born envoy. And that's something that I wear with pride everywhere that I go. And I think some of you who know me know that I have spent a lot of my time working on human rights issues for Iranians, women's rights issues. And I'm so pleased that you all have decided to make today's subject the anti-Semitism of the Islamic Republic. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kohani. Okay, we've been a while that we were talking about the anti-Semitism, anti-West ideology, and also the JCPOA. You know that it is a fact that anti-Semitism and being anti-West is part of the identity of the regime in Iran. No matter if it's the so-called reformists or hardliners who take the power, it means that if you remove these two tenets from their ideology, there will not be any Islamic regime, no longer Islamic regime. Despite the evidence that the regime is pushing the ideology and basically is the revolutionary state, why is Mr. Biden and previously Mr. Obama trying to change the regime's behavior by appeasing them?
Sorry, my mic was not working. Well, look, here's the thing. I actually don't think that the Biden administration or President Obama before this administration was trying to change the regime's behavior. Like you said, they're appeasing this regime, and appeasement is not about behavior change. It's about actually allowing people to continue in the same behaviors that they've always exhibited until now. And so in terms of the regime's anti-Semitism, I don't know if you've discussed this already, but I just want to put it on the record that there's three avenues for their anti-Semitism, which led the U.S. State Department under the Trump administration to designate Iran as the #1 state sponsor of anti-Semitism in the world. And so those three things are, number one, the fact that the government itself, the Iranian regime at the highest levels, including the supreme leader himself, denied that the Holocaust ever took place. And they go so far as having Holocaust cartoon competitions to really make fun of the memory of the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis in Europe. And so that's one prong of their anti-Semitism. The second prong is their proxy activity. Their Al-Quds force, which, as you all know, Al-Quds in Arabic means Jerusalem, and it just goes to show this obsessive anti-Semitism that they have, where everything is about, quote unquote, liberating Jerusalem from the Jews, and their desire to eliminate the Jewish state of Israel off the face of the earth, which again goes up to the highest levels, including the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei himself. And the third prong of that is their oppression of their local Jewish community. And I see that here on the stage we have someone like Carmel Melamed, who has documented as a journalist over and again the over 14 Jews who have been executed by the regime, including 1979 at the start of the revolution, Mr. Habib el-Ghanayan. So all of those things together are what have led the U.S. State Department to designate Iran as the #1 state sponsor of anti-Semitism in the world. In terms of the JCPOA, there is no doubt in my mind, and we saw this right now with the war in Israel, that should the United States lift sanctions against Iran, what will ultimately happen is that those funds will wind up in the bank accounts of Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Kataib Hezbollah, and truly what Iran does is that the regime, I should say, funds all the terror activity in the Middle East, North Africa. So even before we get to their hatred of the West, it's really the hatred of their own neighbors and all the people that surround the Iranian regime. And then, of course, there's their horrible human rights violations against our own brothers and sisters in Iran. So altogether, this is not a country that the United States should be appeasing. There's no good reason for it.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Qanim, for joining us. I have a short question. As you know, many of the Democrat administration have been appeasing with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But I think there is a big difference between, for example, Obama to Biden administration. By your opinion, what should Biden administration do, especially in the rejoining JCPOA, to show this difference to the eyes of us Iranians?
Well, like you're saying, the Biden administration does have a historic opportunity, I would tell you, to finally negotiate the right Iran deal. Barack Obama did not negotiate. His administration did not negotiate the right deal. And the Trump administration took a completely different approach with the maximum pressure campaign. Our approach was that we were going to cut off the regime from foreign funding, from all the funding sources that it has, so that they would then actually change their behavior. And we saw from the International Monetary Fund report that came out about a month ago that Iran has only $4 billion left in accessible foreign currency reserves. So the reality is that the maximum pressure campaign worked, and the Iranian regime is on the verge of bankruptcy right now. So the Biden administration has every opportunity in the world right now to negotiate a good deal. And I'll tell you what a good Iran deal would look like. Number one, there should be no pathway to a nuclear weapon. The Trump administration was very clear that the Trump administration was never going to let this regime have a nuclear bomb. They were never going to have a nuclear weapon. And so I think that would be the first thing to make clear to this regime, that there's no reason for them to ever have nuclear bomb. And that would be the issue, item number one, for a good Iran deal. Item number two would be dealing with the ballistic missile issue, which was also never dealt with in the JCPOA. So Iran has been, as you all know, developing ballistic missile capability and also intercontinental ballistic missile capability, which actually puts Iranians with the ability to possibly also target America. So this is a real issue, the ICBM. And then third, I would advocate that they should be touching on Iran's human rights violations. President Biden, in his first address to the U.S. State Department when he became president, said that he wants to make human rights issues a huge lens of how we're going to be making foreign policy under his presidency. And so far, we haven't really seen that in action with the Iranian regime. So that would be the third point, would be to negotiate the human rights violations and really hold the regime accountable for the fact that, for example, Iran has now become the country with the highest number of executions per capita. Iran is also holding American and Western hostages. So truly, there should be no conversation even with them until they've released American hostages. And so those are some of the points that the Biden administration could be addressing to make a much stronger and better Iran deal than what the Barack Obama administration failed to do in the original JCPOA.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Qanim. I want to give back a mic to Mamadou to continue with another guest, Mediterranean. Mamadou, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Mehdi, because I want to add something and ask Ms. Qanim. I would like to ask for your permission, if it's okay, Mehdi John.
Yeah, it's fine. Go on.
Yeah, okay. You made 3 remarks about the Trump's administration on Iran's anti-Semitism, that they went forward and put Iran on the list for top anti-Semitic governments. One thing that I mentioned earlier, and I gave an example, is glorifying anti-Semitism by the government by the regime, by the Islamic Republic. One notable example I gave was Suleiman Khater, a terrorist who opened fire on Israeli tourists, killing 7 civilians, including children, and also a police officer. What they did, they put a street name. They actually gave his name to a famous street name in Tehran. And also they've done plenty of things in such a manner. But what do you think of that? How do you think the world should oppose this glorification of anti-Semitism by the government, by Iran's regime?
I think that that's a very important point. In fact, you're right that we are seeing glorification of terrorism. We're seeing glorification of terrorists and the murder of Jews. And so, that's clearly heinous acts on the part of the regime. Unfortunately, we see a lot of similar behavior from Hamas in Gaza, which again, they are an Iranian regime proxy. And so the other important point about what happened with Hamas in this most recent conflict, but also throughout time, is that Hamas commits double war crimes where they take Palestinian civilians and use them as human shields. So what that means is that they hold their attacks from areas where civilians live. So whether it's hospitals, apartment buildings, mosques, schools, the building that they knew international journalists function out of, the AP, for example. This is a calculated move that Hamas makes, where they commit these terrorist acts from civilian areas, knowing that Palestinian civilians will get killed, and also they're targeting Israeli civilians. So these are double war crimes that they're committing. And at the same time, in Gaza, also you will see that streets are named after terrorists and Hamas leaders. Schools are named after, all kinds. They celebrate these people every time that they kill Jews. They celebrate them. We saw these celebrations after the 9/11 attacks in the United States. So there is this horrible culture of death and celebration of those who are killing innocent people all over the world. And certainly the Iranian regime has been at the forefront of this. And I think that it's exactly right that it's very important to also bring this to the world's attention, how they indoctrinate children to hate. They indoctrinate children to want to become terrorists, and then they glorify the actual terrorists and the acts of terrorism. And all of this is to create a culture so that there will be future generations who will continue to hate Jews and hate Israel, rather than to raise these innocent children to just live normal lives.
Thank you very much for your great remark. Mehdi Jan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mehdi. I would like to briefly talk about anti-Semitism here in the UK, especially in the UK. As you know, there is too many Jewish people live in the UK. We have a lot of anti-Semitism here in the UK. And I was walking in the very popular area in the Golders Green, which is North London, because there is too many people, Jewish people living there, and where they all reside actually. And being there at the time, witnessing is how they get treated, even the multicultural society. For example, their hair get cut off, they get bullied and they're beaten up, chased down the street, or getting egg thrown on them for just the way look, or even because of the political reason, to be honest. They will be blamed for the political of the country, just the same with other religion or ethnic background that face the same racist behavior throughout the world. My opinion, not everyone use religion as a result, or even so society need to be open-minded about the politics behind the people itself. The question is, has anyone faced any of this problem or has witnessed a racist behavior in the country where they live? I just listening in the audience, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Anyone wants to make a comment on Mehdi's question? Thank you.
Hello. I wanted to make a comment if I'm allowed.
Thank you. First, please introduce yourself for our audience, then please feel free to answer.
Thank you so much. My name is Luai Al Sharif, or you can call me Louis. That's my name when I studied in the US. I'm a social media influencer. I'm a content creator in languages and history. I speak 5 languages, and I'm a peace activist here in the UAE and in the Gulf. I promote the Abrahamic Accords between Israel and the Gulf states. And I know Eli Kohanim from Twitter. Never met her in person, but I would have the pleasure. And the only comment that I wanted to say about anti-Semitism is that I want to send a message to all the Jews who are listening to me in this space and in other spaces as well, that anti-Semitism that you see in Europe and in the United States is very worrying, but you will have, as we say in Hebrew, ein antisemiyut b'ichud ha'emiriyot ha'arabiyot. There is no anti-Semitism in the UAE. You are more than welcome to come to the United Arab Emirates, and you will entertain your full rights, and you will always feel safe. I wanted to add something about anti-Semitism, is that I believe anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The word Zionism, in its core, means the belief of the right of the Jewish people to exist in their ancestral homeland. The word Zion by itself is a very praised word. King David said in Psalm 129, many a times have they afflicted me from my youth. Let Israel now say, many a times have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. Let all those who hate Zion be put to shame and turn back. So I'm a Muslim, and I'm a proud Muslim. I'm a practicing Muslim, but I consider myself a person who loves Zion so much because I know the real meaning. And Zionist means the person who loves Jerusalem, and I love Jerusalem. And as King David said, Jerusalem, if I forget thee, may my right hand it's cutting loose. The anti-Semitism that the world is facing is absurd, is very worrying, but we have to combat it all together while we unite our efforts, Muslims and Jews. And I believe it's happening here, at least in the UAE. I see it from the rulers. I see it from the people. I see it from everyone. Lots of Israelis are coming next week and the weeks next, and you are more than welcome to all the Israelis and to all the Jewish people to come and visit, work, and invest even in the UAE. This is the message that I wanted to send. Thank you so much for listening. And as we say in Hebrew as well, Elohim yivarech otchem. God bless you all. Thank you.
Can I please, is it okay if I just respond for 1 minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Loe, I just want to tell you that I have been following you on social media as well. And I'm so glad that we're finally sharing a stage together. We have to do this more formally. And I want to reiterate something that you said. My last visit in office was to the United Arab Emirates. I was in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And when I was there, I actually shared this. I was asked to speak at a synagogue on a Friday night Shabbat services. And I spoke exactly what you just said. I said that a Jew wearing a yarmulke on his head and a Jewish woman wearing a Star of David necklace is safer walking down the streets of the Emirates and walking down the streets of Bahrain than they are, unfortunately, in Europe. And that's what I said at that time. I said in the streets of Europe. Today, we're finding that Jews are being targeted on the streets of Los Angeles, on the streets of New York, which is my hometown. It is devastating to see this anti-Zionism, which is anti-Semitism, exactly like what you said, Loe. And these are radical Islamic extremist elements that have found their way to Europe and to the United States. And I would tell you that I think for the Jewish people, the most important thing that our Muslim sisters and brothers can do for us is please try to educate the West about the differences between the radical Islamists and everybody else, because Westerners don't know the differences. They just don't understand. They think everyone is the same. They think all Muslims are the same. They don't understand the difference between the radicals and the extremists, the haters, and everybody else. And so I think everything you can do to educate Western audiences is so important. But I thank you so much, Loe, for everything that you're doing. And I thank everyone here for having this conversation. God bless everyone. And I'll let everyone else speak.
Thank you so much, Eli, and I'll keep on doing that as well as you said, because I believe I'm as a Muslim, as a proud Muslim, we should always contribute for the best of humanity. We should never be enemies with the Jews or with the Christians or with other people. We should coexist together and live peacefully in this world to thrive together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharif, joining us. Very glad to have you here. Let's go back to the JCPOA. I have a question for Mrs. Kohani. Speaking of human rights, Mrs. Kohani, why do you think the Biden administration is reducing the number of murdered Iranian protesters in November 2019 from over 1,500 to just 304? Isn't it insult to us? What is the intention behind it?
Sarah, that is a very good question. I actually wrote an opinion piece exactly on this topic in National Review, and I hope everyone will take the time to find it. And what you're referring to is in the Trump administration's human rights reports, which the State Department routinely publishes these reports every single year on every single country in the world. And in our report, we documented that in the 2019-2020 street protests, where we saw millions of Iranians take to the streets to protest the Iranian regime's brutality, the regime took an unprecedented act at the time, which is that they used live ammunition to murder Iranians on the streets. And at the time, we documented that at least, and these were conservative numbers, at least 1,500 Iranians were murdered, over 8,000 were injured, and over 20,000 were detained in Iranian jails. Since that time, when the Biden administration came into power, they did something that has never been done before, which is that they revised our human rights report. And they used the lowest end possible numbers in their report, which was something around 300, I think, something like that. And I wrote this opinion piece, and what I said was that they published this report right before the Vienna talks began. And I believe that perhaps what the Biden administration is trying to do is that they're trying to fool Americans, so that the American people don't understand the nature of this regime, they don't understand the brutality of this regime, and the fact that this is the kind of regime that literally mows down using live ammunition people whose only sin, their only crime was that they went to the streets to protest. That's all that they did. They just protested. And, you know, in the United States over the last summer, we had protesters who were burning down our cities, and American citizens were criticizing the police response to people who are literally burning our cities down. Imagine if the American people fully understood that in Iran, people who go out and peacefully protest can get shot by their own government forces and killed, and that the people, the family members who tried to retrieve the dead bodies of their family members had to pay the price of the bullet that was shot at their poor children and their uncles, their aunts, their cousins, their brothers, their sisters. They had to pay the price of the bullet to get the body back from government officials. That's what's going on in Iran. And frankly, I think the Biden administration just wants to keep this information away from Americans, because the American people would never want to enter a deal with a regime that is this brutal.
Unfortunately, I got thrown out of the space, so we've made this other one. I mean, unfortunately, there's lots of bugs. with the Twitter Spaces yet.
We can wait some seconds for the other guests to join us. Yes.
Okay. And we'll be waiting for more people to join us again. We'll resume shortly.
Sure, but before that, please let me make a remark. We hold the space for 1 hour. Our guests discuss, then we go to the Q&A section for 30 minutes. But time, due to the space bug that we created a new space, and also our guests, it was at the high point discussion. We are going to extend it for an hour or so. We leave it to our guests so they decide in which direction, under the topic, of course. We are going to discuss the topic. Please, Ardashir, if anyone had any questions, let them raise their hands and come up on the stage. And also, you could leave a mention for me if you don't want to come on the stage and ask questions. On Twitter, I'm going to read it to you and ask our guests.
Thank you, Matthew. Please, just before it, let me to have a talk with Reza Parchizadeh. Reza, I'm wondering if you have any comment to add about the talks that Mrs. Kohanim talked about.
Thank you very much, Sirwan, and hello, Ali. Well, I think she explained everything comprehensively. I'm listening, and if I come across any points that I think needs discussion, I will just ask them. Thank you.
If Ms. Kohanim is available, or Mr. Parchizadeh, I would like to ask 2 questions. If we know that the Islamic Republic is not only for unrest and cruelty and terror inside Iran, but we know that they are responsible for the unrest in the Middle East and across Middle East. Even, for example, we know that they exist and they are actively working in. So my question is this. One of the things that were mentioned a lot, especially by Mr. John Kerry, was from Khamenei, that said we don't want a nuclear. But we know as Iranians and as born Muslims, fatwas can change. So today he can say something, but tomorrow he can wake up, see that he has money and he has the science, so he can make the nuclear bomb, so he can use another fatwa, a new fatwa. And that brings me to my question. We are now dealing only on nuclear talks with Islamic regime. The Biden administration and Western powers bring completely the human rights, the missiles, the millions of people in the region, Iraqis, Syrians, Houthis, Yemenis, are being affected by the policies of Islamic Republic and its militias and allies. Why do we accept Islamic Republic natural state under the international law? Why do we do that? We have for 42 years, almost 43 years, that the Republic has not been abiding citizen of the international community. Let's stop them now. Why are we dealing with them right now like this? And imagine the West have any kind of backup plan for after the talks. Imagine the talks are successful, the deals are made, but after a while we know, I am pretty sure we will see Islamic Republic continues its terror region and the world. And then what is the West is going to do? Are they going to still try to talk again to make another deal with them, to give them time, space, and money and power to get more powerful? What you see today in the Western world, the so-called pro-Palestinian protest, it's not pro-Palestinian. We've seen it. Everybody knows it. Telling people. Just last week, 3 Islamic institutes are closed down in Germany because they had ties with Hezbollah, Islamic Republic. So these people know what they're doing. They are going there, slowly, silently, and they are brainwashing the young generation. The solution to all this, why is the West is so willing to accept Islamic Republic, ignoring the human rights, firstly, nation, and then other nations in the region? Thank you.
Thank you, Gongashte, for your question. Mrs. Kohanim, you can answer, and then
Thank you. I'll tell you, there's no good reason why the West has been ignoring, like you said, the human rights violations that are taking place against the people of Iran and Iran's neighbors. One issue that I think your question raises that's very important is for policymakers to try to imagine what would Iran look like without the Iranian regime. And I think that this has become a stumbling block for many people in the West, even those people who are against the regime. I think the experience in Iraq, seeing what happened, the complete chaos, and we're still not in an orderly place in Iraq, as you all know. And the experience in even other places in the Middle East has made the West very reluctant to see regime change in some ways, because in some ways I think they feel like the devil that they know is better than the devil that they don't know. And they're concerned that should the Iranian regime go away, then maybe you're going to have the rise of terrorist actors like ISIS, or something like that will happen in its place. And so I think that to the extent that the democracy movement in Iran can be encouraged, that the opposition groups can learn to work together better and not, stop all the infighting that takes place between the opposition groups, but really try to rally around each other and really just stay focused on the common enemy, which is the regime. I think that would really go very far in showing the West that there is actually some sort of alternative to the regime that exists. And so again, I know that the people in Iran, they pay with their lives for this kind of activity. But at the same time, I really just want to stress how important the pro-democracy movement is. And where I think we saw some success recently was the No to IR, the NA campaign that's been going on now for some months. Because I think what the No to Islamic Republic campaign showed the West is that, in fact, the opposition groups can unite in their opposition to the regime. And so this is, one of the things that I would encourage everybody who's listening is really trying to work together, and let's just unite around the fact that everybody opposes the regime, and that one day there will be a democratic Iran where there could be elections held and people can have their representatives in office, and we can figure out exactly what the contours of that democracy are that, one day. But in the meantime, let's just unite in opposition.
Thank you very much. Reza, do you have any comment about the question?
Well, see, Ranjan, actually, our friend, I think, discussed a couple of points. And I remember he talked about the nuclear fatwa. I remember when a couple years ago during the Obama administration, it was a hot topic in the media here in the US. Me and Mr. Abbas Khosravi Farsani actually penned an article which was published in a couple of places, especially in Israel. And we discussed the nature of the fatwa and how it works, that it is totally contingent and it can easily change. And that it is something that is very much contingent upon one significant issue, a crucial point for the regime, which is the survival of the regime. So as long as they think the fatwa will contribute to the survival of the regime, they can stick with it. But as soon as they think this is going against the regime or its survival, they can discard it. So this is, I think, something that it's like building a house on sand. If the West wants to invest in these kinds of talks in order to enter a deal or re-enter the deal with Iran, this is not going to work. This is one point. With regard to the opposition and a regime, the prospect of a regime change in Iran, I believe that after almost 4 decades, over 4 decades of trying to bring the opposition together, we should understand that this is not something viable because the opposition is made of very different components with very different ideologies, and sometimes they act antagonistically towards each other. This is what I have proposed, and I have worked with the opposition, and I know its history, I know its dynamics. What I have been proposing for the past couple of years, and this was also what I proposed to Mr. Trump when he was in power, is that in order to bring about change, not just in Iran, but the wider Middle East, the United States needs to actually create a democratic and liberal opposition for the Iranian regime. It needs to put in money, it needs to put in support, all kinds of support, because if you look at the regime people here, for example, in the United States, they're living on the regime money. And actually, the money is from the coffers of the people of Iran. This has been stolen by the regime and is spent here on the regime lobbyists in academia and media, even the US government and all other sectors. And they can go on and just propagate what the regime wants. However, the dissidents are mostly, because they are independent, they don't have any funding, they have to actually work hard to get a living, and there remains no time and money for them to invest in political activism. So this is something that needs to be seriously addressed. And I told Mr. Trump and his advisors before, I'm repeating that again. It is okay to actually ask the opposition nicely to come together and work against the regime and do not go against each other. This is diplomatically good. However, in practice, the dynamics won't allow for that. And the regime knows that, and the regime creates antagonism among the opposition groups, and we know how the dynamics work. So in order to avoid most of those problems, I think the United States government needs to invest in creating a liberal democratic opposition for the Iranian regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reza, for your clarification. I want to give back mic to Sarah. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mansouri, and thank you, Mr. Parchizadeh. I would like to welcome our new guests here. But before that, just as a remark, I would like to say that due to the heavy oppression and censorship of true Iranian voices, we get together here to speak directly to the free world about our thoughts and demands. And right now, I would like to welcome Mr. Ben Khalad, if I'm pronouncing correctly, and I would like to briefly speak what we are exactly talking about in this session. We are talking about the identity of the Islamic regime in Iran, which is anti-Semitism and anti-West. And the Iran deal, which obviously we Iranians are against this deal. So I would like to invite Mr. Ben Khalad. Please introduce yourself first for the audiences, and if you have any remarks or questions, feel free to ask.
Shalom, shalom, and thank you very much. My name is Fishel. I am a Pakistani Jew. My Jewish grandparents migrated from Iran to Pakistan. So I'm talking about the Pakistan and Iran as why fighting anti-Semitism is good for the country of Iran and of Pakistan. Because when a country, Jews are very few in numbers, and if a society accepts minority, the smallest number, then that society itself will grow and the majority will also benefit. So fighting anti-Semitism, when a country is fighting anti-Semitism, they are not just only going to protect a very small few people of Jewish faith in their society. That act of against hatred will effect and will benefits to all of the people in that society. Thank you very much. I will now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin, do you have any remarks to share with us?
Yes. Asadi has a question also, but I'll ask mine first if he doesn't mind. Ellie, you mentioned 4 categories that you would go after the regime for: the nuclear program, ballistic missiles, human rights, and I want to ask a question about human rights and the Biden administration. We have a problem at the southern border with migrants coming over, but we also have thousands of Iranians that were approved by the U.S. State Department to enter the U.S. until it wasn't a Muslim ban. Let me clarify that. It was a terrorist ban, because terrorists were trying to use the immigration system in the UN to enter the U.S. Anyway, there's Iranians that have been accepted to the U.S. and have been waiting up to 10 years for entry. And cases are being processed against the southern border for people who won't be hanged if they're returned to Mexico. But the Iranians waiting in line to get to the U.S. and Europe could be if they're returned to Iran. I know Turkey has returned refugees to their death, and I know Iraq has. Can you tell us, and this is not your area at the State Department, but I thought being on the inside you might know, what is being done to assist the Iranian refugees that have already been accepted to the U.S.? Thank you.
So first of all, it's a pleasure to be sharing the stage with you. I don't have specific information about those Iranian refugees. I know the group that you're speaking of, if it's the same group that are in Vienna now for some years. What I can tell you is that I think the United States immigration policy is just is a bit of a disaster right now. And you were right to say that the Trump administration's immigration ban at that time, what people were mislabeling the Muslim ban, was in fact a terrorism ban. And the best way to understand it is that there are many countries in the Middle East, Muslim majority countries, which also have bans from these same countries of travel. So for example, you wouldn't want anyone from Yemen to be traveling into your country, because right now you can't verify who anybody in Yemen is, and you very well may be allowing a Houthi terrorist into your country, right? So this is a situation in a lot of these countries right now. If you're looking at Syria, if you're looking at Iraq, you're looking at Lebanon, a lot of these countries, there's no way to verify who anybody is. And so too many times in the United States, we've had terrorist attacks from people who came into the U.S. under false premises with different visas. So whether it was the 2 brothers who committed the Boston bombing attack and they were here on student visas, whether it was in the San Bernardino terrorists who the woman had come in on a fiance visa. These are the kinds of things that are happening because there's no good way to verify who people are in a lot of these countries. And regarding the southern border, all I can tell you is that the FBI has released statements in the last few weeks that there are people who are infiltrating the southern border from the Middle East. They've caught them. They've released this information. So clearly the southern border of the United States it's a vulnerability for us, and all Americans who want to stay safe really should be concerned about what's going on from the southern border. Absolutely should be a concern. I just want to say real quick that I was so pleased to be able to join everybody. This is the maximum time I had to join, so I just want to thank you all for inviting me. There are a couple of people in the audience who I want to mention that in case you'd like to hear from them. One is Brian Laib, who's the executive director of Iranian American Voices of Liberty. Second is Carlos Abadi, who is an expert on Lebanon and the region. And the third is Adrian Calamel, who's also a terrorism and Middle Eastern scholar and expert. So I really recommend, if you all have time, you might want to hear from these wonderful people who are here. And I just want to thank everybody again for having me here today.
Sorry, last question.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank you for a tremendous job you did at the State Department. I think you're an asset for the Iranian people, for the Jewish people, and for the American people. But my question is this: during your tenure, when you were at the State Department, did the Trump administration have ever tried to provide material support for the protesters and for the Iranian people? I believe, I'm a big fan of maximum pressure campaign. I believed it worked, and diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, military deterrence by killing terrorist general Qasem Soleimani, and then terrorist general Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, which was awesome. But have you ever tried to give material support for the people inside Iran, for the protesters inside Iran during your time in office?
All I can tell you is that President Donald Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, these were people who publicly, strongly supported the people of Iran like no prior U.S. administration has. They completely supported and did so over and again the Iranian people's desires and rights to live under freedom with basic human rights like everyone outside of that country has. All the rights that we in the West enjoy. President Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and everyone down supported the Iranian people's rights to again, basic human rights, basic freedoms, basic liberties. And so I hope that we will see that same kind of support from this administration. I'm not optimistic, but I think that everyone who's here in this room should definitely make your voices heard and keep the pressure on. Let the new administration, let the U.S. members of Congress, let those in the European Union who are in power, let them know that that the Iranian people demand freedom, they deserve freedom, that they stand against the JCPOA, that they don't want to see a nuclear Iran, that we all know what a disaster that means for the Middle East. So again, I encourage everyone to get your voices heard, and I thank you again for having me on. I see that you have brought on Brian Laib to the stage. Again, I also would recommend Carlos Abadi, Adrian Calamel, and Carmel Melamed as well. Thank you again. I'm going to jump off now. Thank you.
He is among us, Mr. Brian Laib.
Hi, hello everyone, and thank you to Ellie for that beautiful introduction and nice shout out. During her time at the State Department and certainly now today, Ellie continues to be a strong voice on behalf of the Iranian people, and I have no doubt that she will continue to be so. Just really quickly, a little bit about me. My name is Brian Laib. I'm the executive director of the Iranian Americans for Liberty. We're a 501c4 U.S.-based organization that advocates on a bipartisan basis, advocates for stronger foreign policy as it relates to the Islamic Republic of Iran, while also using our platform to bring accountability and to give a voice to both Iranian Americans and Iranian dissidents from all around the world that are speaking out against this oppressive regime. And I wanted to just very briefly use my time to bring to everyone's attention, in case you haven't already seen, in the last 7 hours, Ayatollah Khamenei tweeted out his support for Hamas, and he called on them to purify the Holy Land from the contamination of the usurpers. Now, when he says purify, he means kill, and when he says usurpers, he means Jews. So first of all, we need to take a look at the fact that the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hamas and the rest of their terrorist proxies throughout the world are out in the open for the whole world to see, and they need to be held accountable for what they're doing. And secondly, we need to hold Twitter accountable. Here we are on Twitter talking about anti-Semitism in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the leader of this country is tweeting out, calling on Hamas to kill the Jews. How is that allowed in today's world? Where is this double standard? Why, I should say, is this double standard in play where Twitter decides that they're going to deplatform the president of the United States, former president of the United States, Donald Trump, but yet leader of Iran gets to talk about purifying the Holy Land of the Jews. I'll end on that, and let me just echo Ellie's comments about how the most easiest thing that everyone on this chat can do, and your family and your friends can do, is to use your voice, and use your voice on social media, use your voice in person with your family and with your friends, and also have your voices heard with your members of Congress. Take a look at who your members of Congress are, see where they stand on the JCPOA, see where they stand on human rights abuses, and try and engage with them. And of course, if our organization, Iranian Americans for Liberty, can ever be a resource to you, please take a look at our Twitter account. It's at Liberty Iranian, and our website's www.ia4.org. So thank you again to everyone. Keep fighting the good fight, and know that there are groups like the Iranian Americans for Liberty and many others that are out there that will do whatever we can to amplify your voice. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Leib. I would like to ask you a question. How do you see the future of JCPOA, if there is any future for that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's a good question, and I think it's a question that unfortunately a lot of us kind of already know the answer to. Whether it's in the form of the JCPOA or JCPOA 2.0, President Biden and his team have made it very clear that they intend to normalize relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to get back into this deal. Don't be confused when you see Secretary Blinken say, one thing one day and another thing the next day. Unfortunately, he seems to be talking out of both sides of his mouth. And a good example for that is that while he one day condemned the Houthi rebels for launching rockets at a Saudi Arabian civilian airport, the next day he, as we know, took them off of the State Department's FTO list. My personal opinion is that there will be a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. This current administration is committed to that deal, and we all have to know, and I think we all do know this, that any money that this government releases, whether it's unfreezing the billions of assets that this government has frozen, or it's lifting sanctions on members of the regime, the money's going to go to funding terrorism, and the money's going to go to funding extremism around the world. That is the track record that the Islamic Republic of Iran has in play. Unfortunately, while I do believe that this administration will re-enter the JCPOA, I think that we need to continue raising our voices and speaking out against it, because you never know. Maybe President Biden will have a sage moment and reverse course. Does that answer your question?
Mr. Brian, thank you very much for your explanation. As you said, you are the executive director of the Iranian American. So many people may have some questions about your activities, but your direct message is closed, unfortunately. Do you have any other contact with you?
What was the tail end of what you said there? Was there any way to contact me?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course. So feel free. You can follow me here on Twitter, and if you follow me, I will follow you back so we can get connected with each other. You can also send me an email at info@ia4l.org. And also, again, take a look at our website, which is www.ia4l.org. Take a look at what we're doing. We've been blessed to host 10 members of Congress this year for virtual events. We're going to be hosting Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis for another virtual event at the end of June. And tomorrow night, we're hosting an event with two American foreign policy experts, Sean Burns and Elon Berman. And the topic of that conversation is going to be, very simply, what's in it for the American people with regards to diplomacy with Iran. So I encourage you to join us for tomorrow night's event. Take a look at our website, get engaged with us. And just to quickly reiterate, if there's anything that we can do as an organization to amplify your voice, please get in touch with us, and we are happy and honored to do so.
Thank you again, Brian, for explanation. Mamadou, now mic is yours. Continue the space, please.
I would also like to ask Mr. Carlos Abadi to come on the stage. You send an invitation to him?
Yes, I've already done that. I'm not sure if he's received it or not. If you haven't received it, please try to rejoin our space session.
Okay, thank you. And on the topic of the space, you think, because I've heard during the discussion that Biden administration cares more about human rights, but do you believe Biden administrations care about human rights in Iran? Because Iran has been the country who recently, for example, executed a journalist just for being a journalist, Ruhollah. For example, they have the most female prisoners or executions of female, but they got elected in the UN's. I don't remember the exact title, but it was to part of the UN related to the two topics
Women's statues. Sorry, women's statues.
Okay, women's statues. Do you believe really Biden administration, or I don't know, the so-called human rights organization care about human rights in Iran, or they just consider they say it's their culture, they are a country and this is normal there in Iran? Do you believe they really about human rights? Specifically, Mr. Parchi, if you could answer. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Carlos Abadi. Sorry. Was there a question for me?
Go ahead and ask. Please, beforehand, if you could introduce yourself, we would appreciate it. Yeah.
Yes, of course. So my name is Carlos Abadi, and unlike the other distinguished speakers, I'm a private citizen. I don't have an NGO affiliation. But just to give you a perspective of how I got to be interested in the situation in Iran, it's because I'm very involved with Lebanon and have been observing the economic devastation that Iran's regime wrought on Lebanon. And then that led me to understand why that was brought about. And I saw that a similar economic mishandling had happened in Iran. I was absolutely stunned to see that Iran now has correctly calculated a GDP per capita that's equivalent to Guatemala's. It used to be a rich country. It is unfathomable for me. And that is not because of sanctions. That is because of the fact that they misuse the money. They use it to fund proxies, instability, and project power generally. So, I became interested in becoming involved with the expatriate Iranian community because I'm absolutely devastated as the poverty that regime has caused in Iran and elsewhere. This, in addition to all of the things we know about terrorism and human rights, etc. I'm a financial expert, and I'm most concerned about my field of expertise, which is economics. And it's unfathomable that there are Iranian people eating garbage out of trash cans right now for me. So just to tie this with my thinking, this morning, I don't know if any of you saw, there was a tweet by Zarif saying the US has to rush and release those funds because they belong to the Iranian people. And I thought that that statement was very interesting as a bluff to be called, to say, fine, you said it yourself. They belong to the Iranian people, and therefore we will release them through a program monitored by the World Bank to the Iranian people. I think that the fact that the Iranian people are the beneficial owners of the funds and that it comes from a high government official is something that you should use to your advantage and try to call the Islamic Republic's bluff with.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos, for the highlights of Iranian role in the disabilities in the region. I want to come to Mr. Parchizadeh for the conclusion. Mr. Parchizadeh, how do you see the future of the JCPOA renegotiation, and if they can make a deal, by your opinion, does Islamic Republic of Iran stop its behaviors in the region?
Thank you, Sirwan John. As a couple of our friends already mentioned, I also believe that the Biden administration is going to conclude a deal with the Iranian regime eventually, and we will hear about it soon. But as we said around a decade ago, people like me, when President Obama was about to make a similar deal with the Iranian regime, that this regime is not going to keep its promises, and they're not going to actually limit their nuclear activities and their nefarious activities in the region either, their expansionism, their support of terrorism, and their interference in countries in the Middle East, and their suppression of the Iranian people. So eventually, like what happened to Mr. Obama's deal with the Iranian regime, I think this deal will also go down. However, as I said before, this administration needs to do what it wants to do, and we dissidents and activists and people who want democracy in Iran and the Middle East, we need to do what we need to do. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I am very glad to have been able to speak to you nice people. I hope there are more opportunities for us to come together.
Thank you, Reza. Thank you very much for your presence here. Thank you. Thank you. I want to give back mic to Ardeshir. Ardeshir, are you here?
Okay. Yes, we have requests to ask questions. I see user called Ayatollah Huawei. I'm gonna make you the speaker so you can ask your question. Can you hear us? Hello.
Chinese Ayatollah, please.
Hello, everybody.
Well, okay.
Can you hear me?
Hello, please go ahead.
Yes, we do hear you. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very well. I want to differentiate something between Islamic Republic government and Iranian nation. Actually, anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism is a basic rule or knowledge or thought of radical Islamic governments from Iranian nation or even Muslim. It's very important to know that Iranian nation, I'm talking on behalf of ordinary Iranian, it's very important to know that Iranian loves peace and happiness with all nations in the world, all religions in the world. And this is very important for countries to know the truth about Iran and our people. And another thing is, unfortunately, Iranian nowadays, they are like hostage in a bank robbery. And they can't do anything. We don't have any local police or military or force to support them. So In this situation, what should Western countries do? I mean, they can forget about the people, the hostage inside the bank, or they can decide to help them. But I mean, negotiating with Islamic Republic is cooperating with them in their crimes. And I want to attract your attention to this point. Mrs. Eli Quanim said that the West is worried or has concern about after Islamic Republic, such the experience that we had in Iraq or other countries. But be sure that Iranian is totally different from Arabs, nations, or other parts of the world. You can look back to our country 50 years ago. We are not like them. We are under the pressure of Islamic Republic, and be sure if there is no regime, I mean mullahs in Iran, so whole the Middle East area will be safer. And it is guaranteed by Iranian nations. Thank you very much.
I just want to add something to which Mr. Ayatollah said. Iran is a very ancient, powerful civilization with a great, rich history. And what the current government of Ayatollah is doing, they are misusing Islam against their own people, and they are not doing any service. The great history, the great glorious history of Iranian nation and the current mullah of Iran, they are doing great disservice to the religion of Islam in Iran. And yes, all know this. Just I'm finishing my point. We all know this, that the mullah of Iran, the mullahs of Iran have nothing to do with Islam. They have nothing to do with the ancient glorious civilization of Iran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Official. I would like to thank all of our guests and the audience. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for all the audience to come up and ask their questions, as we have limited time. With this said, I would like to remind you that this session will be recorded and we will upload it on YouTube, and the links will be shared. So you can share that link with your friends to help us with helping us to have a broader audience and to help our message to reach more people. I would like to thank you once again and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
All and good day and night.